My name is Dr. Suzanne Bender, and I am here today as a representative of the grassroots organization Opt Out Newton. We are a group of parents, educators, community organizers, and physicians, and we asked at the public hearing on June 6th for the Newton voters to have the opportunity to decide whether we want retail marijuana sales in our city. This is a webinar of that talk. So as part of our process in learning about question 4, we learned that in Colorado and in Washington state, when they voted on whether to legalize marijuana, it was not mandated that every community had to sell retail marijuana. In fact, it was a completely separate decision, and every community then voted whether to opt in to commercial retail marijuana sales. And in Colorado, that was only 30% of communities. So the marijuana industry learned from this experience, and when they were involved helping craft question 4, they mandated that every community in Massachusetts, if question 4 passed, which it did, would be mandated to have retail marijuana sales in their community. So for Newton, what this means is that we are mandated by state law to have at least 8 retail marijuana dispensaries, and we come to this number of 8 because it's 20% of our current liquor stores. So when question 4 was on the ballot, some people were concerned and they said, is the community ceding control to the marijuana industry if we vote yes? And proponents of question 4 said, no, you do not have to worry because every community is going to have the opportunity to opt out of marijuana retail sales if that is what they feel is best for their community. They did make the procedure rather difficult if your community voted yes, and this was intentional because they wanted to protect their sales. But it is our legal right as a community to vote on whether we want to opt out of retail marijuana sales via ballot measure where the voters decide, and in addition, a city council vote. So what we are asking for today is we are asking the city council to let the Newton voters decide in a November ballot measure if we want retail marijuana shops in our community. And at least 27 city and town councils, and this number is increasing weekly, and these are in towns that have voted yes, have allowed their constituents to vote on this issue because it's supported by state law. So there's 3 ways to a ballot measure in Newton. First of all, the city council could support a ballot measure on their own, as many other communities have done this in the Commonwealth already. We created a citizens petition to increase the attention to this issue and asking the city council to support the ballot measure to allow us to have the opportunity to decide whether we want to opt out of retail marijuana sales. Another way to get a ballot measure is to get 6,000 signatures to the city clerk, and the city council approves of this measure, or you can get 9,000 signatures to the city clerk, and there's no need for city council approval. So we feel that to have the opportunity to vote on retail marijuana sales in Newton, it is entirely unreasonable to expect us to collect 6,000 signatures. When we look at how many signatures do you need to collect if you want to have your name on the ballot in the Newton City Council, it's only 150. The opt-out group in Acton collected 146 signatures, and their city council said that's fine, we will put this on the ballot. In Belmont, it was 230. Joe Kennedy, who represents the 4th District of Massachusetts and 700,000 voters, only is required to collect 2,000 signatures to get his name on the ballot for a federal election. So it is unreasonable to ask the opt-out group to collect 6,000 signatures for a ballot measure that is already supported by state law. Opting out of retail sales does not affect an adult's right to use marijuana. People have said to us that we want to ban marijuana. That is not the case. An adult right to use marijuana recreationally is protected. Medical marijuana use in stores are protected. The adult right to grow marijuana is protected. When the state allows home delivery, it would be allowed in Newton. Currently, there are 3 proposed sites of the minimum of 8. And these are actually in family-friendly areas. And for the residents near these stores, potential stores, it is very unclear they're going to have any input into the placement of these stores. One is Murray's Liquors in Newton Center by Bill's Pizzeria. Newton Center is crawling with kids every day of the week on early release of all ages. The former South Pacific restaurant location in Four Corners, which is on the walking route of the Zervis Elementary School children and also near Cold Spring Park. And the former site of a green tea restaurant, which is also in a residential neighborhood. Supporting legalization does not mean that your community supports commercialization. Of 27 towns that have voted yes on question 4 and have already had the ballot measure, 24 out of the 27 have voted to opt out of retail marijuana sales. Another way of looking at it, 54% of Massachusetts voters supported legalization. In opt-in, opt-out elections, so these are in towns that voted yes, 60% of voters have voted to opt out. Of the 27 towns that have voted on opting out, 89% have voted to opt out. So we wanted to see if the Newton electorate would follow, if our voters would look like the voters in the greater Massachusetts. So we sent out a Google survey, and we crowdsourced emails from multiple listservs. We sent emails to everyone we knew, whether they were pro or con marijuana, and we asked them to forward the emails to everybody they knew, that forward the Google survey. And we asked, did you vote in favor of legalization in 2016? And 53% said yes, 47% said no. So in 2016 in Newton, 55% voted yes, 45% voted no. So we considered that our sample on the 230 individuals on the Google survey were representative of Newton as a whole, within 2%. We then asked, when you voted on marijuana legalization, were you aware it would require Newton to have at least 8 stores for recreational marijuana? And 79% said no. Then we said, do you think Newton voters should be able to vote on whether or not to opt out of recreational marijuana stores? And 69% said yes. And finally, we asked, if a vote were held, would you vote for Newton to opt out of recreational marijuana stores? And 59% said yes, which is completely consistent in what we are seeing in the rest of the Commonwealth and communities that voted yes. It is critical that the Newton voters decide this issue, not the marijuana industry. There was so much money behind question 4. $4.3 million that was involved in promoting question 4 was from an out-of-state, Washington, D.C. pro-marijuana super PAC. We remember the advertisements. They were all about legalization, decriminalization. There was nothing about the mandate of having multiple stores in your community. The anti-question 4 group had much less funding and was funded much more locally by Massachusetts residents, Partners Healthcare, which was Brigham and Women's, Mass General Hospital, Newton Wellesley Hospital, Mass Medical Society, and the liquor industry. People have said to us, we cannot lose out on the tax revenues from this opportunity, so we looked at this in more detail. A March 2016 report from the Massachusetts Special Senate Committee on Marijuana found that the tax revenues and fees that would be generated from legal sales may not even cover the full public and social costs. So we did some back-of-the-envelope calculations. An average Colorado store has about $2.5 million in sales per store. The tax on marijuana in Massachusetts is only 3%. So this is due to the fact that the marijuana industry was involved in the writing of question 4 and they protected their interests. That's only $75,000 per store. 8 stores is $600,000 per year. So looking at Amherst, Massachusetts, which is much smaller than Newton, they anticipate spending $550,000 just to cover the public health and social costs of the retail marijuana stores in their town. That's 2 new police officers and 4 new emergency medical technicians. So the $600,000 for marijuana sales in Newton, which is 0.15% of our budget, it is not clear that we will even break even with the public and social costs of having retail marijuana stores It is not a moneymaker. This is not an example of NIMBY, not in my backyard. It is the legal right of every community in Massachusetts to decide what is best for that community regarding retail marijuana sales. So far, over 80 towns have decided to opt out of retail marijuana sales of varying demographics and size, from Weston to Methuen to Lawrence to Lexington. Why is a marijuana dispensary more concerning than a liquor store? 4 reasons. First, there will inevitably be increased secondhand smoke. While it is illegal to smoke in public, it is naive to think that people will not come to the retail marijuana store, buy and consume nearby, causing increased secondhand smoke in Newton Center and Cold Spring Park and residential neighborhoods. The all-cash business model, which is necessary because it is currently federally illegal to sell marijuana, invites increased crime to any area. With increased exposure in the local community, we are worried about our youth. We'll talk about this more in a minute, and we are inviting impaired drivers to our community. So as a child psychiatrist, this is how I became increasingly concerned. The young brain is uniquely primed for addiction, and 1 out of 6 young marijuana users becomes addicted, and it looks very different than with alcohol. With alcohol, we worry about binge drinking. With marijuana, first the teen starts using on weekends. Then they start using a couple times a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week, in the morning, at lunch. With the little 10s, they can bring it to school and use at school. Meanwhile, their gray brain matter is changing with chronic use. It adversely affects motivation, attention, and emotional development. If they start young, there are increased risks for dropping out of school and with dissatisfaction with lives and relationships. There is an increased risk of psychosis with the diathesis stress model with schizophrenia. What that means is that if you are wired for schizophrenia, if then there is a specific stress like marijuana, there is a clear association that the marijuana can trigger the schizophrenia, which is a lifelong, debilitating, chronic psychiatric illness. Long-term use can also increase the risk of depression and anxiety. So some might say, well, legalization has been decided, so why does this matter? Well, it matters because when there's more marijuana, more kids use. Here we have some data from Colorado. We see that the communities in dark purple are those with the most increased youth use since legalization. And then if we correlate it with the stores on the right, we see that the communities with the greatest increase in youth use are those with the youth who have access to stores right nearby. Marijuana use impairs driving. In Colorado, marijuana-related traffic deaths increased an average of 48% after legalization. In Washington State, it increased 122%. Driving after using marijuana approximately doubles the risk of a collision. Colorado Public Health says any amount of marijuana consumption puts you at risk of driving impaired. We are taught a lot about how much it is safe to drink and drive, or how to get a designated driver. This discussion starts very early on in high school or in college when people are trying to educate about alcohol. There is no breathalyzer equivalent to identify drivers who are high, and there is no amount of marijuana that is safe to use and then drive. Meanwhile, Weston, Lexington, and other neighborhoods nearby have voted to opt out, so we are inviting people to come to our community to buy. At least some of those people will use and then drive home high. So we made a picture here, which I'll explain, looking at area around Newton. And the red communities have voted already to opt out. The orange communities currently have a moratorium, which means they may in fact decide to opt out in the near future. Newton is blue, and the white communities have either opted in or we don't have information, such as in Dover. So we can imagine that Newton is at great risk of becoming the regional supercenter for marijuana sales, in which case multiple people will be driving into Newton, increasing traffic. Some will be using, driving home high, and putting in danger our children, bikers, pedestrians, and other drivers. The precautionary principle is the idea that if something is very controversial, we need to act to do the least harm. And all we are asking is not for anything special. We are only asking for the opportunity as a community to vote on whether we want retail, recreational marijuana establishments in our city. It is our legal right to have this opportunity. Multiple other communities have already had this vote. This is our only chance to opt out. To avoid any concern about the influence of marijuana on the question of commercialization for our community, we need the City Council to support this ballot measure and send this question back to the voters so Newton can decide what's best for Newton. In the talk on June 6th, final words were then, I handed off to Dr. Michael Jelinek, and he was the chief of MGH Child Psychiatry for 32 years, the president of Newton Wellesley Hospital for 12 years, and a consultant to many Massachusetts school districts for decades, including Newton. His comments will be available soon. Thank you for your time and consideration. If you are concerned about recreational retail marijuana sales in our community of Newton, please see our website, Opt Out Newton, and we will give you information on how to email the city councilors and the mayor about your concerns. Thank you so much.